My next guest was Canada's first parliamentary budget officer. Kevin Page is the founding president of the Institute for Fiscal Studies and Democracy, and he's with me now. Mr. Page, good to see you again.
Good to be with you, Peter.
This is a fiscal update delivered at a time really like no other. What stood out for you in what you heard from Chrystia Freeland, what she delivered today?
A number of things stood out. The numbers are still shocking because they're just we have not seen deficits and debt, this magnitude, and we continue to add to these deficits and debt. I think the strategy is interesting. It's kind of there's still the focus is on the pandemic, but there's this small move towards the recovery. And this idea of forward guidance around fiscal policy, really telling people that they could expect to see stimulus in the $70 to $100 billion range over the next 3 years without really setting a fiscal anchor or without really defining what that stimulus could look like.
To your knowledge, is any other country budgeting that way? Or I know we're in a pandemic, so lots of things are different, but does Canada stand out?
Yeah, I think we're going to stand out, and I think we stand out for different reasons. One, we stand out already when you look at the size of our deficit and debt, and you compare the year-over-year shock. Canada is probably one of the largest countries with respect to providing fiscal support. So we've seen this really massive increase in the deficit from just under 2% last year, 1920, to almost 17.5%. In 2021. And then, I think the other point, really starting to provide this sort of guidance that we're going to, Canada's saying we're going to provide fiscal policy support that's going to be ongoing beyond the pandemic. And, these rough order of magnitudes, I think the IMF would be happy with this approach, but I honestly, Peter, don't know of another country that's laid it out in a document this way.
Okay. And so, I don't know if this is the right way to frame it, but is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing, or something we just haven't seen before?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing for probably a few reasons. One, it is really, I think there's where the economy is hurting right now, because of the pandemic. But the other side of it is just the investment has just plateaued or fallen off. Businesses don't want to invest in this environment. There's just too much of uncertainty, and again, some of that is linked to the pandemic. But we have monetary policy where we provide forward guidance, so businesses know that these interest rates are going to stay low. I think, for businesses and households to know that the federal government's going to provide additional strong supports for a number of years. And, they could potentially be constrained by something the minister calls guardrails, but it's still a pretty significant ongoing support. I think it could be quite positive from the point of view of kind of just providing that transparency and bolstering confidence going forward.
Yeah, how long can the federal government, go without reintroducing a fiscal anchor before international bond agencies, for instance, look at all of that and say, we got a lot of questions about that, and they look at possibly lowering Canada's credit rating?
Yeah, I think that discussion almost starts right away. Even with this update, I think part of it, this document really frames that conversation around. It provides a sort of medium-term planning framework. It really is quite honest with providing different scenarios. There's lots of uncertainty, and some of these scenarios are negative, so they're not hiding potential economic truth going forward. But I think, the issue of the anchor, I think that's got to be part of the debate around the size of the stimulus. And I think so that this is a pre-budget consultations discussion now, and we've never really had this before, not in my lifetime.
Right. So I guess on the, you touched on it, we could see somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 billion in spending rolling out. And it occurs to me that when you listen to the government talk, it's targeted spending about getting more women in the economy, about a child care plan, about a green economy. And to some people, that'll sound like re-engineering an economy, picking winners, picking losers. Is there a message for business in this country about what's been laid out in this document today?
Yeah, it's. I think businesses and I think future debt holders are going to want to know how much of that stimulus is really going to be really capital investment. So if we're deficit financing all of this, what proportion of it really is capital related, as opposed to a lot of those programs that you referred to, which will be we will as citizens consume those tax dollars, but they'll have to be deficit financed by future generations. So I think that, again, it's a conversation that we're going to be having. why not talk about fiscal anchors in this document? I think the minister, for some reason, and maybe following the advice of the prime minister, they feel that in the context of the pandemic, there's just too much uncertainty to talk about what level of debt to GDP is appropriate. But I think, again, in these numbers, when you build in the stimulus, like you're getting debt to GDP numbers in the 55 to 58% range. And a year ago, we were sitting at 31.
Right, but the government looks at, as you know, the government looks at that number, the debt to GDP ratio of 55 plus, and says, that's okay, we're still better than a lot of countries in the world. We can still borrow money at that level and still be okay.
Yeah, and I think there's some truth to that, we're adding enormously to the stock of debt, but the carrying cost of the debt is not really moving because, interest rates, the effective rates is very close to zero. It was an unusual historic environment in its own right. But I think the document doesn't provide a lot of scenarios like what if we were to see a tripling or quadrupling of interest rates over the next 5 years? What if inflation returned and brought back higher interest rates? Right. Just how heavy would that debt? That's not in the document.
All right. Still a lot to parse in all of this in the days ahead. But Kevin Page, thanks for your early perspective tonight.
Thank you, Peter.